In this session, we would focus on what is rhetoric in communication. Now, recently we have seen lots and lots of questions from the topic of rhetorics. Now, rhetorics in Aristotelian point of view, that is the logos, ethos and pathos, have been discussed separately in another lecture. Very, very important, so just go through carefully. Now, coming on to rhetoric. Now, rhetoric has two important meanings. One is when I question, let's say, do you see the door is open? So that's a kind of rhetoric. And another way is when I say a rhetoric statement, but it is meant to persuade someone, or the idea is to imbibe persuasion. So whenever I'm talking about a situation, about a phenomena, I'm trying to persuade the person who is listening to it. So this kind of communication usually comes in with narratives. Even in narratives, mainly form, genre are some of the ways through which persuasion is done. Now, another important aspect that we need to understand is sometimes when we are trying to explain how language functions, in that time there is a relation or a connection which is established between the speaker, the writer and the audience. So this communication has to be investigated, and finally the things have to be brought into a certain fashion that the audience actually is more involved to listen what you want to convey to them. Now, this rhetoric situation helps you to take a decision based on your approach for a new task. So there are few terms that we must understand around it. The first is heuristics and hermeneutics. Heuristics is basically understanding how part of the text or how approach to a communication impacts the audience. So any part of the text that you are speaking or conveying, how would it have an influence on the audience is what is heuristics. Hermeneutics is, on the other hand, understanding why certain texts have deeper impact or have an impact in a specific certain way. So let's say you go to a preacher and they are explaining you certain things, right? Of those 10 things, possibly the person might get influenced by 2 of the things, for example, and this is what is we explain under hermeneutics, that why certain texts have deeper influence or have influence in a certain specific way on an individual. So whenever there is a rhetorical situation, how and why you communicate is governed and shaped by numerous aspects. For example, first is the writer or the author who is trying to communicate, and they are known as rhetor. The next is the audience who is actually listening. Now these audience can be the primary audience, secondary audience or tertiary audience. What is the topic on which the discussion is going? What is the purpose of that topic? The context and the cultural aspect of the topic. And then, as we said, the 3 aspects of Aristotelian rhetorics are really important: ethos, pathos and logos. Now these ethos, pathos and logos are framed or guided within what is called as kairos, and this kairos is the timing, and this timing indicates that rhetoric is brought at the right time to have a deeper touch onto the audience. Now when there are narratives, these narratives are a story which is never just simply a story, simply said, right? So what you are trying to do is you are trying to either contemplate any problem situation. How would you confront with that problem situation? How would you see your future grow with that situation? So those kind of things are part of the narrative. So narratives help shape the public viewing or the public memory, and they also help in retelling of the events that usually take place. Now, under narratives, there are 2 aspects: diegesis and extra-diegesis. Diegesis is what is inside. So inside of the story is diegesis. Extra-diegesis is something which is outside the story, as the name suggests, extra, right? So for example, I take a story or a whole play around 9/11 tragedy of World Trade Towers, right? So this 9/11 September 11 tragedy, if that is the sole thing I'm talking about, it would be part of digest. However, I'm talking about another story, but I'm trying to explain briefly about what happened in 9/11 as part of the main story, or it is outside the scope of the story, but it has certain kind of relation with, possibly you could say, terrorism or certain issues like that. In that case, it is part of extra digest. So how do we connect the ideas, the thoughts, the flows are really important in part of narratives. Now, even in narratives, time is very important. So how a story progress, how well you are able to bind the audience and have them listen to them is an important aspect. So narrative time is really important, and this happens as a step-by-step process with an overall arc which connects the beginning to the end. Now under this, there are various terms that we would discuss. The first is fabula, then we have Juzet, metonymy, metaphor, kairos, which we already discussed, and chronos, right? So let's talk about kairos because we have already talked about it. So kairos is basically the timing, the correct moment, or we call it as the opportune moment. Now this moment is the moment which strikes the audience the best. So let's say I'm creating a whole tragic play or a comedy play, and in that the key aspect of the play would be the opportunate moment, and that is what is explained under kairos. So one has to have a good awareness of the situation in order to reach to that point, and the ability to respond to it in terms of verbal expression. Then is chronos. Now chronos is the events which unfold with time, right? So we can remember it as part of chronology. So here there is a overall time of the narrative, and then beyond that time you extend it to the past, you extend it to the future, and there is where we talk about chronos as part of chronology. The next is metaphor. Now metaphor is a overall slippage of the story, we can simply say, and here it actually explains how beginning transforms into an end, and putting the two moments under relation with one another. So you are trying to explain